OK, it's kind of weird that everyone can't. It's not projected, so I'm just going to take a second to get used to that. OK, so yeah, as you saw, the title of the talk is Mobile Doesn't Have to Be So Hard. So what I'm working on is something called Exponent. It's a free, open source project built on top of React Native. So to be clear, when you're writing things with Exponent, you're also writing a React Native app. It's just the layer on top of it. It was founded by two former Facebook employees, Charlie Cheever, James Ide, and several of the React Native core contributors. And we like to think of it like Rails for React Native. That's just to give you a little bit of background before I talk about something completely different for a few minutes. So it's quite possible that a lot of people here are not entirely familiar with the difference between React Native and something like Ionic or Cordova or any sort of web view-based tool. So Cordova and Ionic and that sort of thing, the way that they work is they use something called a web view. A web view is basically like a view containing a browser inside of it. And the way that they allow you to access some native APIs is by some variant of changing the URL, and then on the native side, the native handler will watch for certain patterns in the URL change, and then make native function calls and inject the arguments back in. So what you see over on your left there are sort of the primitive components that you get with the DOM, right? You get like text and headers and text input and select and various kinds of things like that. Of course, you get more things, like you have a video component now, and there's a bunch more like that with HTML5. But you can see pretty easily how it looks significantly different from the primitives that you have on iOS and Android. So you have things like the map view. That's just built in. That's a native component. Get these progress views. There are sliders. There's these toasts, all sorts of stuff like that. So in the context of Cordova and anything with a web view, what you have to do is you actually have to recreate these views by essentially styling your some DOM elements to look like them. So really, it's just HTML and CSS. And then you have to recreate any of the behavior, any of the animation curves, or there's a lot of subtle behavior in many of these components that is quite difficult to recreate. And anyhow, so the primary difference between React Native and some of these other tools like NativeScript and Titanium and things like that is that they're actually using the components that are native to the platform. So the map view that's used there isn't like a HTML5 canvas with various things drawn on it. It's actually just the native map view that's provided by iOS. And yet you're still controlling it from JavaScript. And it feels very similar to running a React app inside of the browser. So is anyone unclear about that? Happy to take a couple of questions. Usually, people don't get it right away. So if anyone is unclear at all about the distinction between Cordova and React Native, let's try and settle it right away. Anybody? Oh, that's pretty good. Usually, there's some people. Awesome. OK, changing topics again. So mobile is hard. I don't think anyone would disagree with this. I don't know. Does anyone disagree? Mobile is hard? Mobile's easy. Put your hand up. Let's chat about that later. I'm curious. Unless you're just trolling me, but that's fine. OK. So I think there's three ways that it's hard. Three sort of groupings of things that you could say. So first one is it's hard for the web, right? You go to mobile websites, and they really just do not feel in the same sort of space, the same sort of realm of quality as an actual native app. So I think that the DOM and the web APIs, as they exist today, now it is, of course, possible as the web evolves to catch up or whatever. But the way that they exist today they're holding us back from building native feeling and native quality applications. For example, we can't really handle touch gestures very well. There's just no good way to do it. You might see when you use apps that use web views, if they have something like a side menu and you drag on the side menu and then it is scrolling the main thing at the same time, all sorts of issues like that. Yeah. Another one that's a big limitation is what I was mentioning in the earlier slide, the previous one actually, was that you can't use the native platform components, right? So you can have, like, if you are using web views, you are just using these DOM components within that kind of subtree of your app. You can have, in hybrid applications, like a container component type thing. So maybe you have like a tab view at the bottom, and then within that, everything else is a view. But if you need to put, like, inject a map view or your own video component or whatever inside of one of these web views, you can't do that. I mean, you could probably find a hack to do it. And it would not be very pretty and might not work. Hard to say. So yeah, I guess the question then is, like, why is it like this? Because mobile's been around for a long time. So how come mobile web isn't quite there yet? There's been a lot of efforts recently to improve it with things like service workers, which are pretty awesome. But at the same time, I still have yet to see an app built with service workers that feels even comparable to an Android app or iOS app made by someone who knows what they're doing with Android or iOS. So it's still not quite there. So I think that we're limited in that, well, the web needs infinite backwards compatibility, essentially, right? You go to a website from 1990, it's still going to work today. Another one is that the standards process. It's great, right? You have this committee that makes sure that we have very well thought out designs and APIs and everything that goes in. Yeah, some of them maybe aren't so well thought out, as it turns out. But generally speaking, some of the smartest people in the industry coming together, collaborating on this. It moves very slowly. And then you get the browser adoption problem. Thankfully with Chrome and the new release cycle, anybody who uses Chrome pretty much gets the newest version very frequently. But you can't ensure that people are going to be on any version of anything. And unfortunately, that just holds everyone back. Especially when it comes to Android. And Android having different versions of Chrome on it, or different browsers entirely. So it's just hard to say. Yeah, so really what it comes down to is when you build an app with Cordova or other WebView tools, it just doesn't feel as good as a native app. If you disagree, come find me afterwards and show me one. I'd love to see that. I've just yet to see one. Now, of course, you could reach into the internals of Chrome's rendering engine, Blink, or into like WebKit, and you could write some C and add whatever features you want, and then you could compile that and include it as your own custom web view inside of your native app. But I've never heard of anybody doing that, and that sounds like really a lot of work to get around the limitations. Yeah. So when it comes down to it, I mean, the web is awesome. But if the web worked as well as native, there's no question that we would be using it for apps. The distribution model and development workflow is unparalleled right now, I think, when it comes to software development. But at this point, it seems like apps have kind of won the war, as far as I could tell. The next issue is that it's really hard for organizations to build mobile apps. So, all right, we can't use web technologies if we want to have these really high-quality apps, or at least we can use them only in very limited situations. So we decide to bite the bullet, and we learn Objective-C or Swift to write our app in iOS, right? And so even though the development cycle feels much slower, at least we're in the same position as our competitors. We'll run into the same walls. We can make the same quality of apps. So we do this. We adjust our release process because we now have no guarantees for when Apple is going to approve our releases. We add some extra QA because when you actually launch a release, if you want to fix a crucial bug, that might not exactly happen on your schedule. So you have to be a bit more careful about it. And then, of course, once iOS is done, we go through the fun process of hiring an Android engineer, or the, I think, much less enjoyable process of learning it ourselves, and which says a lot. And then we re-implement the same thing, right? I mean, maybe some slight differences, maybe use material design or something. But when we re-implement it, we're now using entirely different languages, tools, configuration. Like the entire stack is different, the entire stack. So as your company grows, you split out iOS, Android, web teams. The people who on these teams essentially implement the same features, but in different ways. So the main purpose of this just being that the pixels in your app are drawn out using the platform-specific UI toolkits rather than some generic web version of that. So you maybe even have product teams that have, if it's a big enough product team, has their own iOS, Android, and web team within that. But of course, it doesn't always happen that work on one product proceeds at the same pace as work on another product. So maybe if the iOS team finishes a bit quicker, they have some free time, they can't just jump over to help the Android team. And the web team can't just go to iOS or Android either. So that's a really hard management problem. And the third and last point is it's hard for people. So I did a little bit of traveling just for a few days before coming to Amsterdam. And I met an Irish lad who told me that he spent 70% of his day compiling his app in Swift. Like, he laughed about it. He's kind of drunk, but still, he laughed about it. And I mean, I would hate to do that, but he seemed totally OK with it. He was able to tell me how many seconds it would add to the compile time if he did a certain technique for array concatenation, or if you used a ternary operator or existential operator. Oh, no, that'll add 3 seconds to my compile time, so I don't do that. I do it another way. That just sounds awful to me. That sounds disgusting. I would hate to have to think about that while I'm coding. Not to bash Swift. It's an early language. I'm sure it's going to get a lot better. The compile times are getting better over time. But the fact right now that he's spending, by his own estimates, 70% of his day compiling sounds like not the best use of time. Yeah. What do I got here? Oops. All right. So what would a better mobile development story look like? I think if the mobile web was capable of producing native quality apps, we'd probably just want to use the mobile web, right? Probably most people here are web developers and probably quite like it. I mean, you get Chrome, you get the Chrome DevTools, Inspector, you can install like Redux DevTools and rewind things and all of that. And it's great. And then you leave and you go to native and you have none of those things. You have a different set of things, but you don't get the same sort of like quick feedback. There's a lot of stuff that you lose out in the process. So this list of things that I think would make a better sort of situation for mobile development are definitely heavily inspired by the current web workflow. So one thing that would be great is one language, right? You want to write everything in one language and use one set of abstractions for building your UIs. So that could be JavaScript. I guess Xamarin took the approach of C#, but unfortunately, Xamarin does not meet the second criteria here, which is one set of abstractions. You're still writing using most often the platform-specific UI toolkits. So there are some abstractions that exist there, but you still have to be familiar with sort of iOS and Android frameworks. One workflow, so you don't want to have to, you implement a feature on iOS, you don't want to have to go to Android and now open a different editor and then start profiling using a different tool, different tools all around. I mean, when you think about it, there's so many different tools associated with building an app, you can just imagine. And so, yeah, one workflow really seems ideal. You do it in one way, test it on whichever device you're interested in, and then when you want to deploy, you deploy it in exactly the same way. That seems nice. Native APIs. So you need to have really comprehensive access to the platform-specific components and APIs. HTML5 exposed a lot more APIs and has done an excellent job. Like, you can do so much with the web now. There's a camera, WebRTC, there's WebGL, web audio. Web audio made really cool things possible, like React Music. If you've tried that before, you can do like video calls in the browser. It's like really, really awesome stuff. So anything that we want for improving, I think, native mobile, we want to have that same sort of comprehensive set of APIs that we can access through JavaScript. And again, using that same abstraction. We need to have fast feedback. So on the web, you see feedback immediately, essentially, right? If you use hot reloading, it takes maybe half a second to see the results. You can just inspect an element and adjust it inside of the DevTools and see the feedback immediately. And that's really awesome and something that you miss out on when you have to wait a minute for compile time to see if the padding changed slightly. Another thing is, I think it should be URL-based. I think the web has shown that URLs or something like URLs are just a great way to share content and organize content. So if I want to, if I have an app and I'm working on it and I want you to take a look at it, I should be able to send you this URL, just like if I had a development server running and I was working on whatever app we're working on at our company on the web. I could just send you the URL to it. You could go in, look at it, and try it out and whatnot. I think you should be able to do the same with mobile apps. Yeah. Another one is instant deployment. So Play Store is pretty good. Maybe take an hour or so sometimes to get approved. So it's not too bad. iOS has been getting a lot better on the Apple App Store. We were pretty happy that an update to Exponent recently only took 24 hours, so that was good. Usually now I think it's about 2 days. That's still a lot slower than whatever you have set up. I'm sure if you have continuous deployment set up for your app. I mean, it just gets deployed whenever you want to. There's no third party saying, okay, you can now give this to your users. And like I mentioned before with QA, that's potentially an issue when maybe you're a bit more lenient on the web, like, oh yeah, let's just ship this, it looks good, it passed the test and whatever. And then you ship it, and then, oh no, there's a bug, okay, roll that back. Well, you can't just roll back a deploy to the App Store. You have to then submit a new build, and you have to wait another day or two. You can ask them to rush it, but there's no guarantee. There's just someone sitting there like, should I do that? No, maybe not today. Another one is shared configuration across platforms. So like in the browser, you just say, for example, here's the favicon. It looks like this. And then if you're on Chrome or if you're in Firefox and Mac or Windows or Linux, you get that icon. It's fine. It works. You set the title, one configuration. That's sort of the name of the page that you're on. On native platforms right now, when you want to do various kinds of configuration, you dig into these XML files and plist files, and everything's named differently on different platforms. And you're essentially changing the same things. So in my opinion, this should be something that is exposed in just a common API with, that's shared across platforms. Sharing code across platforms is also really important, I think. So I think that this is pretty straightforward. You don't want to write more code than you need, right? So if you could share code, have it run on iOS and Android, and web as well, then that would be fantastic. And then I would like this sort of thing set up. Maybe this is something that the web doesn't have. So it's just so common to do. I mean, web does have actually pretty good support for push notifications now, or at least Chrome does. But there are other services that this one's more inspired by hassles with mobile, where you get into an app and you're like, OK, now I need to add this boilerplate code here to handle push notifications, and I need to do this here. Then I need to set up something on the server so that I'm refreshing the token and so it's all this stuff where it's like, you shouldn't have to spend that much time on something that is essentially like something that every app needs. So it would be nice if any of these tasks that can be done automatically are as simple as like inserting a key that identifies your app, and then you're hooked into this kind of service. And then the last one is escape hatches. So this is what I was mentioning before, where like sure, you can fork Chrome and Blink and do whatever you want with it. That is technically an escape hatch. Now, nobody would be able to take advantage of those features if they just went to your website through Chrome. If you were shipping an app with that fork of Chrome inside of it as your web view, sure. But that is an entirely impractical way to do this. And so it should be possible to have fairly convenient access to escape hatches. So if, for whatever reason, this JavaScript-only approach or single language approach isn't working, if the APIs that are provided from this host platform don't cover your use case, then you should be able to go down to whatever the native runtime level is and add whatever functionality you need at that level and expose it back to your code. So OK, I think that's kind of legible. So what this is kind of like a comparison on these various features and how well React Native does at them and how well Exponent does at them. This isn't trying to say anything bad about React Native. I absolutely love React Native. Exponent is just built on top of React Native, I think, to try and solve some of these problems that simply aren't relevant for Facebook in their use case of React Native. So some things like one language. Most web developers don't want to have to learn Objective-C and Java to build their mobile app. You only ever use JavaScript with Exponent. It's as simple as that. One workflow. You never have to open Xcode or Android Studio with Exponent. You do have to do that semi-frequently with React Native, whether that's for configuration or all sorts of things. The native APIs, I mean, you can add any native API that you want through the escape hatches that I mentioned before. There are third-party libraries and whatnot. But what really comes with the React Native core itself is kind of just the core platform primitives. You get a slider, you get a text input, text, image, even map view. It's included for iOS, but not for Android. There's no video, there's no audio. It's kind of a bare bones set of stuff, and you're expected to then install the rest of them or write your own. Fast feedback, yep, that's for both of them. Live reload and hot reloading. URL-based, React Native is not URL-based. Exponent is, and I could show you what that means in a minute. Instant deploys, you can set that up with React Native if you install Code Push. I'll show you in a minute that you just get that out of the box with Exponent. Shared configuration, with React Native, you have to do the same thing as regular native. You open up these XML plist files, adjust them, whatever. No shared configuration. And you, in Exponent, just use a single JSON file for configuration. You can share code possibly a bit more because it's all JavaScript with Exponent. And I'm just going to skip ahead on this. The last point that's most important there is escape hatches. So escape hatches are kind of a work in progress with Exponent. But that's something that with React Native you get full access to. I think I'm actually running out of time. That was fast. OK, give me 2 more minutes. I have a workshop right after this, so if you found this interesting, let me know. I have a good 10 more slides here, plus a bunch of workshop content. So I'm just going to jump ahead to like, right. So in the workshop, I'm going to finish up the slides that I've been doing here. And then I'm going to walk you through building just a simple app like this, get some data, finds your geolocation, sorts it in a list, gives you a nice way of presenting it, a little photo gallery kind of thing, hook up your state to Redux, et cetera. Works on iOS and Android, and yeah, that's pretty much what it is. So I hope you come out to the workshop. And last point, even if you don't, you should give it a try. Exponent is free, so you have nothing to lose, except your precious time, which I can never give you back. All right.